Hi everyone, welcome. We will give folks just a couple minutes to join the virtual event and then we will get started. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Guzzi. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at Harvard Divinity School. I'm also an alum. I did the MTS graduating in 2015. And I am going to take you through a very short HDS overview from admissions. I have a PowerPoint for you, so I'm actually going to turn off my camera so you can just look at the PowerPoint, and then we will turn it over to our wonderful panelists. All right, so a little bit about HDS. We are located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Harvard Divinity School is one of Harvard's 12 graduate and professional schools. HDS was founded in 1816 and is the most religiously pluralistic divinity school in the world, representing over 30 faith traditions, including students who aren't affiliated with any faith tradition. HDS brings together scholars of religion in conversation with religious practitioners as learning partners and community members. Our degree programs lead to infinite pathways with alums in every field and industry who value ethical leadership, religious literacy, and service-oriented, mission-driven work. So here's a quick snapshot of who is at HDS. This is some data from our incoming class. So we have 90 MTS students, 44 MDiv students, and just one THM student. Within the incoming class, 52% identify as female, 32% as male, and 16% as non-binary. The average age is 25, and the age range of all the students enrolled goes from 20 through 56. HDS students reported over 30 different religious affiliations. 36% of the incoming class are students of color, and then international students make up another 14%. And in addition, we have 99 colleges and universities represented in the incoming class, which just highlights that we have students coming in from a really diverse array of institutions and academic trainings. So here's a little bit about our 4-degree programs. So we have the Master of Divinity, or MDiv, which prepares graduates for chaplaincy and ministry, broadly conceived, or a range of other careers that center around service and ethical leadership. The Master of Theological Studies program, or MTS, enables students to explore deeply and broadly the languages, literatures, thought, institutions, practices, normative claims, and structures of a variety of theological fields and religious traditions. The Master of Theology program, or THM, is for applicants who already hold an MDiv and is designed to allow students to explore a topic in great depth or delve into a new topic that impacts their ministry, whatever that might look like. And then we have a brand new degree program, the Master of Religion and Public Life. This is for applicants who are experienced professionals who wish to develop an in-depth knowledge of the ways religion influences public life in their career field. So here's a little bit about some resources at HDS. So we have 5 affiliated programs and centers, which you see listed on the left hand of the slide. And this includes our brand new program for the evolution of spirituality. Note that there are also hundreds of other programs and centers elsewhere at Harvard that HDS students have access to for programming, funding, and other resources. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a photo of our wonderful faculty here at HDS, helmed by Dean David N. Hempton in the blue at the front. Faculty are pretty accessible to HDS students and are on the whole quite happy to provide guidance and mentorship. We have a very flexible curriculum, and there were over 230 HDS courses offered last year. And HDS students also have access to courses across the entire university, as well as throughout the Boston Theological Interreligious Consortium, or the BTI, which is a group of 10 theological institutions of higher education in the Boston area. And they offer easy cross-registration, as well as a range of other resources across institutions. MDiv and MTS students, actually 50% of your coursework can be completed outside of HDS, so students can truly customize their HDS experience to create a unique pathway through the program and get the preparation that each student needs for their goals. And if none of the thousands of courses available to you fit the bill, you can also work directly with HDS faculty to do an independent study. So given all of these options, it's safe to say that no two HDS students have the same transcript. A little bit about student life. The Office of Student Life supports over 35 different student organizations every year. It's also easy to start your own. These student organizations host over 60 student-led events each year, in addition to over 500 recurring events, which include weekly worship services hosted by faith-based student organizations. The photo you see here at the bottom is from the 3rd annual Black Religion, Spirituality, and Culture Conference, hosted by Harambe, a group for students of African descent this past year, which brought together scholars and students from a wide range of institutions, as well as outside of academia. There are also 2 weekly events at HDS, noon service on Wednesdays and community tea on Tuesdays, and students have access to events and organizations across Harvard. All right, this is a pretty important topic, financial aid. We offer very generous financial aid, and 90% of our students receive funding. This funding is available for the MTS and MDiv programs. We put the vast majority of our financial aid funding into need-based aid in order to get the most money to the most people who need it. And therefore, we strongly encourage everyone to submit a financial aid application so you can be considered for need-based aid. 10% of our students receive merit awards, and those are based solely on the strength of your application, nothing additional needed. And for our need-based aid, the baseline package is a 75% tuition grant. And then for folks with more need, we offer higher packages that cover 100% of tuition, and then some for the folks with most need, 100% of tuition, and they include a living stipend as well. Going the wrong way here. Okay. All right, here we go. This is the right slide. So the application timeline. If you are thinking about applying to start in fall 2021, the application is now available, and the deadline, there's just one, no rolling deadline. Our deadline is January 7th, 2021. Admissions decisions will be released in mid-March, and if you're admitted, you will find out your financial package within 24 hours of receiving your admissions decision. So lots of ways to stay connected with us. In addition to joining us for virtual events like this one, we also have current students monitoring this email address you see here on the slide. We also have a great blog. Check out our Instagram, and please feel free to email us with questions. We are always happy to chat with you and answer any questions that you might have. All right, so now I'd love to turn it over to our wonderful panel who will talk to you about field education at HDS.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Welcome, warm welcome from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I am the Assistant Director of Field Education. My name is Laura Tuak, and I'm joined by the Director of our program and Assistant Dean for Ministry Studies, Emily Click. And we're thrilled to be able to share with you the work that we do in field education at HDS, but not so much by way of us talking too much, but by way of hearing from 4 of our fantastic, extraordinary students who will share a little bit about their field education work while MDiv students here at the Divinity School. So just by way, a little bit of introduction about the field education program at Harvard Divinity School. Every Master of Divinity student needs to complete 2 units of field education, and Master of Theological Studies students are welcome to join in the program, but are not required to. Those students who are Master of Divinity students or MDiv students will engage in field education in a variety of settings with sites that we have established relationships with or by their own making through a process we call student-initiated proposals. We have about 100 accredited sites that students can look at and interview with in healthcare, in educational settings, in parish settings or congregational settings, and nonprofit settings. And then they can also branch out. If there is something that they don't see on our list, they can submit a proposal. And we work very closely with students to customize experiences that will advance their educational and vocational goals. Like Sarah said in the intro, no 2 transcripts are alike. Well, no 2 field education placements or trajectories are alike either. Our offerings are as creative as our student body are. So whether you're interested in spirituality and the arts or medicine or law or pursuing traditional religious leadership in a Sangha or a Jewish congregation or a church parish and everything in between. Those are the kinds of things that you're able to do when you engage field education at Harvard Divinity School. Not too much detail, but just to give you a sense of what a unit is. During the academic year, students will work between 12 and 15 hours per week. So they'll be working part-time in their field education placements to complete a full year internship at 350 to 400 hours. And then during the summer, students can also engage in field education, but they do so full-time. So working about 10 weeks at 35 to 40 hours a week. We even have students who go internationally when we're not in the middle of a global pandemic. We will send anywhere from 4 to 8 students all over the world to explore what ministry means in a global context. So field education is meant to be an integrative experience where students are engaging in the fields in very real terms what it means to do ministry, and we conceive of that incredibly broadly, and integrate their classroom experiences. So bringing to bear those things they're learning in the classrooms, conversations with faculty and peers, and bringing it into conversation with the things that they're experiencing in service to others, especially those in the most vulnerable positions in our world. So, and what makes it so unique is that each week students engage in an hour of professional supervision, we call theological supervision, where students are helping to or striving to make sense of what it means to be committed in this way to service, whether through traditional faith perspective or to their own ethical perspective, that they're trying to make sense of their functioning in relationship to these highly held values. So that's a little bit by introduction. I'd like to, and we'll have time for questions and answers. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat. And we will have a good period at the end of our session to go through questions and answers. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Emily Click, the Assistant Dean for Ministry Studies and Director of Field Education, so she can introduce our fabulous panelists. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Laura. And I must say that I want to give you the warmest of welcomes. We are so grateful that you're joining us today and learning something about HDS. We consider it an honor to host you in this panel. My husband is bringing me some coffee. Isn't that nice to have that just arrive at that moment? Zoom is fun, isn't it? So I'm thinking of you in your settings all across the world as you join us today, anticipating coming to HDS. Whether you come virtually or in person, probably in fall of 21, you'll be able to come in person, but who knows? But either way you come, there'll be a place for you. And Harvard can sound scary. It can feel like, oh, I don't know if I will have a place there. Additionally, divinity school can sound scary. It can sound like you have to be a professing Christian or totally religious studies major or whatever. But I assure you that our students come from around the globe. They come from a real range of backgrounds. They have a very diverse range of religious affiliations. Many students proclaim themselves to be nuns, N-O-N-E, meaning they're here, but not because they have a religious affiliation. They're here for other reasons. And I cannot overstate the diversity of places to which they will be destined. And I think Laura's given you some summary of that, but I want to, in order to introduce our panelists, tell you just briefly that a lot of our students are becoming chaplains in a range of settings. And one key piece of that often intersects with field education is called clinical pastoral education. Several of our students will talk about their experience with it. In order to free them up to just talk about their experience, I'm going to give you a definition of it. We always say CPE quickly, and you don't know what that stands for, but it stands for clinical pastoral education. It almost always takes place in a hospital setting. You go to the hospital ordinarily, and you're part of a cohort group of people who are learning together, both about how does one meet people in their hour of great, terrifying need and be present to them in whatever their religious affiliations might be or not, and be respectful of them and what it is that they need. But also you're exploring your own inner wiring and your own inner convictions to see kind of how does that surface and make a difference in a time like that. So that's what they mean when they say CPE. Okay, folks, I hope panelists that sets you up nicely. So you've got a little summary background. So now I'm going to introduce the panelists, then I'm going to step back and let panelists, you're just going to follow each other in the order that I introduce you without any further introduction. Our first panelist will be Tien Nguyen, who has come to us from Vietnam and frequently was going back and forth, I believe. He can tell you more about that. His two field educations have taken place, first one in the setting at MIT, particularly working with the Buddhist community there, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who take up the other half of Cambridge, basically. And also now is working with the Buddhist Association of Massachusetts. So we'll look forward to hearing from you, Tien. Next will be Charlotte Zelli, who did do CPE at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which you never hear called that. It's always BIDMC, in the summer of 2019. And then all last year worked with the Harvard University Office of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response. Following Charlotte, we'll hear from Emmanuel Correa Vasquez, who worked in 3 different field ed settings, the first being at the Institute of Peace Studies in Eastern Christianity, and then worked at Mount Auburn Hospital, which is another way of preparing for chaplaincy. It doesn't happen to be clinical pastoral education, but it's an opportunity to work closely with a very experienced hospital chaplain, and I'm sure he'll tell you more about that. And now is working with Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, which is a Lutheran church located in Cambridge, who not only is a worshiping congregation, but also is very involved in feeding people who need additional meals for a variety of reasons in our time. Following Emmanuel, we will hear from Sally Hamill, who also did CPE at New York Presbyterian Hospital in the summer of 2019, and then worked at Harvard's Memorial Church, Mem Church, we say, which is located right in the middle, smack in the middle of Harvard University. We have a worshiping community. And so she did her work with them. And then last summer, while all field ed was being done virtually, Sally did a unit of CPE at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Thanks, panelists. I'm stepping back and putting mute on my microphone, so take it away. Tien, you're first.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Laura and Sarah. What should I talk about? I'm kidding. So the talking about field education is just like, just like my question just now. What should I do, right? I kind of, didn't have much background or experience working outside a Buddhist temple because I've been a monk for a long time. So entering field education is like, reflecting back that, even one doesn't have that working in experience, one still can do it. So when I first started my field at MIT, I thought, maybe it will be easy because I didn't have to like teach much about Buddhism or religious practice because MIT they're about technology, science, computer or whatnot. But as it turned out, students were so eager to study Buddhism, study meditation, study mindfulness, and they were not actually Buddhist at all. They came from different traditions, or some of them were not affiliated with any religious institution, right? So it was challenging. It was challenging because I have to like invent new kind of vocabulary to deliver Buddhist and mindfulness meditation. And that was really rewarding because if I want to continue my path teaching meditation or teaching Buddhism in the United States, I have to have those kind of vocabularies, or I have to use a different language so that people, could understand me better. And my second unit of field education was also very challenging, especially during the pandemic. I was planning to do CPE, but then the pandemic happened and I couldn't do it. And I was kind of panicked because I was planning everything, but then HDS allowed me to initiate my own field education, which is really wonderful. And I thank for Laura and Emily for that. So one of the best thing I love about field education is the theological reflection. I use the word spiritual reflection because I have hard time understand theology. So that is the time when I am able to speak with my supervisor and raise my concerns or learn something from my supervisor during the time that I work with him or her. And that was the best time during the, you work and then you have support from your supervisor and also from, the Office of Ministry Study, Laura and Emily, So that I cannot, tell you all the wonderful things, but I think my fellow panelists will give you more. But definitely field education is one of the most like meaningful experience that I received from studying from HDS. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. And thank you everyone for including me. My name is Charlotte. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from Minnesota. And like Emily said, I did 2 units of field ed. And I actually also did an internship that wasn't field ed virtually, in case that's a question that comes up. I think Sally, though, will be best at answering it because she actually did a field ed online. I'm embarrassed to say this, but before I did CPE, clinical pastoral education, people would tell me, you'll learn a lot about yourself. And I was like, I already know myself. And I was wrong. So I thought I had a really good understanding of myself, and it turns out there was more to discover. And I think that in both CPE and at my internship at Harvard University, I felt the uncomfortable concept of not having as much output. It was less like, here is how I have served and proved my worth. I have delivered this item, which I did do, but it was much more about learning the skills and then reflecting on what was happening, things that were coming up for me that I might not have realized were impacting the way that I was in spaces, issues that come up in the fields that I work in, et cetera, and having a theological reflection with a supervisor. And I would identify as a nun, but still theological ways to talk about meaning making. Having that accountability was really important because I could never just do the thing. I had to think about how I did the thing and why I did the thing and what the outcome of that thing was. And so that later on, as I did an internship that wasn't field ed, I was able to, I think, be more intentional in that space and get a lot more out of it because I learned the skill of reflecting. And I learned about how important it was to reflect with other people who could provide insights that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do just through my own self-reflection. So I think field ed for me it was amazing to get experience, but it was also amazing to do it in that mode where I had that kind of support and that accountability. And was working on, these specific learning goals. Am I making it? And I don't think there's a lot of times you get that opportunity. If you have a job or sometimes even an internship, it's a very much output oriented, which is good. I'm not against that, but it's such an incredible opportunity to be able to have learning be your focus so that, you can be a better person and better in your field later on. And so I really appreciated that. And yeah, I think that's my main thing. I will also say that doing it concurrently with classes, I definitely felt like I was putting into practice what I was learning in classes, and then at the same time bringing back my experience to inform my classes. So it was definitely synergistic. Yeah, I'll say that for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions later.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Correa. I'm a third-year MDiv student. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and I'm right now working at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Quincy. And I've done like 3 different kinds of field education that kind of could have taken me to different vocational paths in a way. So I think that when I first encountered field education, it was, I think, the precise moment for begin a process of discernment about what I was looking for vocationally and trying to discover what is it that I'm doing at HDS and what are my goals as a future student, like as a student or as a grad student or as a future professional. And I think that during this whole time, I've been divided between being more academic oriented to whether continue doing a PhD later on or continuing to study to get doctorate level or go into a ministry and do something that I consider more practical, had a little bit more gravitas for me in a certain way. So field education was a way to discover that. So I started with the Institute of Peace Studies in Eastern Christianity because I had a theological and academic interest in Eastern Christian theology. And so I found out that I had a knack and a more closer approach to a more ministerial and spiritual things related to spiritual care. during that placement. And through theological supervision, I was able, like my supervisor, like gave me very good feedback on that regard, and I kind of like started seeing more clearly what was it that not only that I was more good at, or that I had a closer leaning to personally, but that the discernation process kind of like got a much more clearer. On my second field that I did a chaplaincy, a kind of like chaplaincy introduction at Mount Auburn Hospital with Reverend Beth Loomis, and it was kind of like what I call theology in the trenches, because I started interacting with real people in real suffering. And I started to kind of find out what were my theological values, what were the things that I really cared about, and considering a vocational path in ministry, especially Christian ministry. So I think that was a very formative experience in which, how do I interact with people in very dire situations? And I kind of like found out that I do like chaplaincy as a vocational path, and something that I could consider for the future in a kind of like bivocational aspect, both in congregational ministry, which is something that I'm exploring right now at Good Shepherd, and hospital chaplaincy. And there are other different types of chaplaincy that is available in the fielded list of accredited sites. But for me, coming from a more health professional environment, is the one that I was more attracted to vocationally. And now with Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, I'm an ordinand in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And it's a way to explore my pastoral identity. So especially now with the pandemic, has changed completely. So the experience is not what I expected at all. And I'm discovering new things about how to do ministry during COVID, and possibly projecting towards a post pandemic world. So right now things are in a whole new array of things. So what I thought was going to be congregational ministry at one point completely changed now. So this is part of the discernment process, and field education really helps with that. So if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer. So I'll just leave it up to Sally.
Thanks, everybody. This has been a particular treat to hear each of you talk about your experiences. So yes, I'm Sally Hamill. I'm a third-year MDiv student as well, and I had the opportunity to do 3 field eds. One in the first one at New York Presbyterian Hospital was a traditional CPE experience where I was with 5 other cohorts. Let's see, we had a Jewish cantor, a Jewish rabbi in training, and then a Jewish someone who wanted to become more of a professor type. We had a Pentecostal and a Quaker and me. I'm Episcopalian. So it almost sounds like a joke, but we had a great time. We were at it was just wonderful to have this, my goal is to become a hospital or hospice chaplain. And I wanted to have the experience of what is that like? What does that mean? And that first unit at New York Presbyterian was an opportunity to have some on the ground training where I literally walked into hospital rooms to say, hi, my name is Sally, I'm the chaplain, and deal with whatever was going on with that, and to really get experience and develop my pastoral authority, develop relationships with people, and really learn what that was about. One of the things that was interesting about that was that the hospital I was at was up on 200th Street, up in close to the Bronx, and it was highly Catholic. And one of my, I was raised Catholic, but I've kind of turned away from that to become Episcopal. And I really got a chance to examine, what does that mean? If here I have a lot of Catholic people, so how do I pastor to people when I wasn't necessarily on board with the religion part of it? And what I learned was that I actually was able to retrieve some of my old favorite Catholic prayers, and they had a bunch of plastic rosaries that I had stuffed in my pocket. And what I really learned there was that it wasn't about my faith tradition. It was about how I was able to connect the patient to their faith tradition. So giving them a plastic rosary and being able to say the Hail Mary with them was a very meaningful thing for those people. So that was a great, great experience for me to see that I could bring all of myself into this service and didn't have to necessarily be the faith that I was with the person with. The other thing I wanted to say is that having Office of Ministry Studies kind of piggyback us, there were like training wheels for us where we would all meet together. All the people in that summer unit got together and met and did some trainings and meetings. So you really feel supported, because it's scary to walk into a hospital room and say, "Hi, I'm Sally, I'm the chaplain," you know. And you know, so that was just a very, you know, very meaningful and rich experience. During the school year, I had the chance to work as a seminarian at Memorial Church. And that was such a blast. If we get to do that again, I highly recommend it. I had so much fun because I got to see what it was like to actually wear a robe in a church, like actually be in that clergy role, which was another thing that felt like I never saw myself doing that. But it's a very robust community, and it's very Harvard-y. You know, they got these crimson carpets and the thick paint on the walls. It's just a very rich kind of thing. And the music there is amazing. They do have an amazing choir. Plus, I got to facilitate morning prayers, which is a 15-minute service that's been going on since the 1600s. It's amazing. So that was a very satisfying field ed experience. That was for my academic year. And this past summer, I did a unit at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York in the pandemic. First, it was canceled because of the pandemic, and then I was going to take Greek instead. And I decided, then when they put it back on and said it was virtual, I thought, I mean, the whole point of being a chaplain is to be a non-anxious presence at the bedside, right? How do you do that virtually? So I was very intrigued to have that experience, and it was extremely frustrating, but also incredibly meaningful in certain ways. And I learned things about how to connect with people without having that physical presence, you know, but one of the biggest things I learned in that was, I'll tell you this quick story. There was a woman who was blind, and she was a resident. We were dealing with residents. All I had at my disposal was the telephone. So we were talking, and she said, "I'm a Buddhist, and I'd like to connect with my temple, to do some chanting. And I have access to Zoom, but I can't type in the password." And I'm thinking, this poor woman, she can't get access to her community because she's blind and she can't type in the Zoom password. Well, my business background kicked in to say, I got to solve this. But what I learned through that experience was, it isn't about me solving this. It was about me helping that woman to connect with her own disappointment about the technological hurdle of not being able to access her community. And what ended up happening is, when the community understood what was happening, they came to her, or they made phone calls to her. So that was an incredibly powerful learning for me, to know that my job is not to fix it, but it's to accompany people through their struggles. It was a very valuable experience to do that. And now I'm getting into learning a lot about telechaplaincy. I've had a lot of exposure to that now, so it's been quite interesting to see all that. So anyway, so field education has been a tremendously important part of my Harvard Divinity School experience, because we actually get to be boots on the ground doing the work. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate that. I'm going to encourage all of our participants to feel free to put any question that you'd like answered into the Q&A. A couple people have done that, and they were fairly easy to answer, so we put the answers in. You can read that, but you can also raise a hand and just go ahead and ask our panelists questions. And I will, I don't know if you can raise a hand and do that. Can they do that? Sarah, does that work?
I don't think so. I think the best way is for folks to just put their questions in the Q&A functionality.
Okay, sorry. And then we'll make sure your questions go right to the panelists. So before we get those, oh, it looks like we've got a couple of questions. Sally, is the Memorial Church service space on campus denominational?
No, it's interdenominational. That's the word. So do they really celebrate all religions?
Then there's a question. Hello, thanks for all this great information. I'm wondering if students ever work with college or university chaplains for their field ed. And I wonder if Charlotte or Sally got to work with students during their field education on Harvard's campus. Let's turn to Sally first, and then Charlotte, and maybe both Sally and Charlotte can tell about some of your buddies who you know have worked specifically in university chaplaincies. Tian was talking about a university chaplaincy as well. So maybe Tian can follow Charlotte.
Yeah, I know that there are other students who have done university chaplaincy stints. And it's the way it works is that as Laura and Emily have said, there's a lot of organizations who work with HDS to do the field education piece. And so, it's just a question of connecting with those people to sign up for that experience.
Yeah, I think that I was going to start working with students just on doing intake forms with them before I set them up with services, but then the pandemic happened before I finished the training that would allow me to do the direct service. But I think that that wasn't really the focus of that program. My internship was more focused on programming. So like events, and in that way I interacted with students. I'd say more direct service is definitely a thing for the friends that I know who have done university chaplaining. And I think that included, for example, running a like discussion group around, I don't remember, maybe feminist theology at a college chaplaincy office. So that kind of thing, but I'm sure Tian has a better sense.
Yeah, I did one unit at MIT working with students there, and I provided like weekly meditation section, and also I planned and organized some events like inviting public speaker to talk with students, and organizing one day kind of one afternoon retreat for students. And the possibility is so rich. You can do many things, helping students to, because they're very stressful, right? So you do whatever that you think is funny, is interesting, and it helps students to step out of their stressful state of mind a little bit. That would help. Yeah.
Thank you all. Another question I think was really good that maybe we could start with Emmanuel and then the rest of you could answer is, did you have a sense before you even came to HDS what you might be wanting to do for field ed? Did you have any conception of it ahead of time? That was the question. So Emmanuel, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I did not I knew I wanted to explore like what was it to do academic theology and what it meant to kind of have an applied theology or the ministerial experience. So I kind of tried to figure out what exactly how that fixtured in within the field ed sites available. I did not belong to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America before entering HDS. So I was in a mode of exploration, and I was seeking between the sites what was something that appealed to me more, because there's like a field at site fair, and you kind of interview with a lot of the supervisors, and you find out if that placement really speaks to you in a way that you would like to keep pursuing and explore more. But I don't think I had, for example, in my first placement, I only had an inkling that this is something that I like, but I didn't have necessarily a blueprint as to how that would extend further on. So it's a lot of exploration is possible.
Others?
I'll just say I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't know what field ed meant. I had found it very confusing. So, but there's a lot of support from the Office of Ministry Studies and different panels and things. And I think, isn't there a fall, well, there used to be like a fall event where, you know, you could meet some of the organizations that were, offering field education opportunities. My situation was a little different because I live in New York City, so I wanted to find a place that was based in my hometown. So, but most of the other people, I think, do their field ed through local organizations closer to Cambridge.
Laura, I want to make sure that something's said about meaning making. I wonder if you might introduce that. And then there's also, Laura, a question I think is best for you to start us off on is how competitive are field ed opportunities for HDS students? Do students ever have trouble getting a placement?
Well, that's a great question. We work with all students who want to engage field education. I wouldn't call it so much competitive. I would call it that there are sites that are more popular, but it somehow works out that every student finds a placement that is good for their learning, even if they are disappointed that they don't get their number one choice. But honestly, we don't often hear that. I really wanted to be here, but I ended up here. Instead, what we hear is, I learned a lot by being in this placement that I didn't expect to be in. So I wouldn't say competitive per se. I want to say a little bit about meaning making, Emily. I'm glad you brought it up, because I was thinking the same thing. When students engage their first field education placement during the academic year, which you are allowed to do in your first year, which Emmanuel talked about, he engaged field education upon arriving at HDS. So you don't have to take a number of classes before engaging in field education. That's a little bit different from some of the other schools of theology or divinity schools. They may have some prerequisites before you engage in field education. At HDS, we believe that learning takes place in different settings, sometimes simultaneously with your coursework, sometimes not. But we invite students in their first year to engage in field education. And when you take your first academic year placement, whether it's in the first or second year, you will also enroll in a course called meaning making. And here's another opportunity to be in a small group with your peers who are also engaged in ministry and reflecting on that ministry together. Using a model that helps students explore what they believe about their work and begin to articulate their own values, their own theologies, and to support one another. So sharing from one's own particular perspective helps another in the group to make meaning of the experiences in ministry that they're having. So that's a year-long course that is paired with a year-long field education placement. And for many students, it's a really also rich learning experience, one that many say is really integral to their MDiv experience. So I'm glad you brought that up, Emily. I thought I would also just answer the differences between CPE and field education for folks who are pursuing ordination. The ordaining body is going to dictate whether you need to take a formal clinical pastoral education unit or if you can do a unit of field education in a hospital setting. They are different. Emily outlined what the CPE experience is like. It's a separately accredited program where students are responsible for paying tuition to enroll in that. When students do CPE, they can get field education credit. Now, if your ordaining body just wants you to have some hospital experience, you don't necessarily need to do CPE. You could be at a community hospital like Emmanuel was at Mount Auburn Hospital. So they are different experiences. One has a cohort, and the CPE has a cohort, as well as these additional educational programming that they offer, while a traditional field education placement at a hospital would be, you know, standard 12 to 15 hours. You'd probably be the only intern at that site at that time. So those are a couple of the differences. I also want to just add before we take another question, is that at Harvard Divinity School, if you are federal work-study fund eligible, you may get paid for your field education placement if that site is also eligible and meets federal guidelines for the use of work-study funds. This is also a little different from many of our colleagues in field education across the country. We have a real commitment to students being able to try not to hold down multiple jobs while doing their MDiv, although we understand that's getting more and more difficult. So that's why we have made that an opportunity for our students. So, so you don't necessarily need to get another job on top of the field education placement, because you would already be using your federal work study allocation. So that is a real benefit of doing field education with us.
And in addition to the work study allotment, if you are working in a setting that is not eligible, oops, can you hear me all right? That is not eligible for work study funding, we do require that site to pay you as well. And that goes along with our philosophy at HDS, which is also kind of unique, which is that we encourage all students to be full-time students. And if you're a full-time student, and in addition to your coursework, you're doing field ed, you just literally don't have time to do a job also. And that's why our philosophy is that every site needs to compensate students, some of whom do that through work study.
We had a question about how integrated is the academic coursework with individual field education experience. I'd actually love to hear from a panelist or two about how you do that, in addition to the meaning making class where it's intentionally integrated. But what about your other classes? What experiences have you brought into the classroom, or what learnings have you had in the classroom that you tried out in the field? Can I tee anybody up for that question?
I'll jump in on that. There are some excellent courses at HDS in chaplaincy with Cheryl Giles and Chris Berlin, who really prepared me well for chaplaincy. It just helped me enormously to have taken some of those courses, which was really helpful. The other thing is that actually during the CPE unit, you're getting, for me, it was 100 hours of education in addition to 300 hours of clinical work. So you're actually getting didactics and training on during that CPE experience. But in terms of the coursework, the other thing was learning about, you know, I took a course in New Testament, and that was very, very helpful to be able to draw on the scriptural, you know, understanding things towards my chaplaincy too. So
I would say also kind of on that note that a lot of the classes provided me with frameworks to think through some of the things that were happening in field ed. And so there were a lot of live questions that came up for me, like, you know, for example, are we driven by the need to be good versus the need to help to really make sure others are well? That was a question that came up a lot for me in classes and in field ed. And so I also feel like it helped my discernment process. But then once I decided I wanted to work in the field of gender-based violence, there were a lot of classes that I think are really helping me do that. So for example, right now I'm taking a class on Christian sexual ethics, which is a really important foundation to understand how theologies can be really helpful, and in some cases, if used incorrectly, pretty harmful and can contribute or lessen or respond to violence. And so that's been an important way that I've kind of used field ed and classes together.
Kind of to kind of piggyback on that, we have a question that says, can our panelists share more about how their placements have shaped their academic explorations? So were you in a placement that actually you realized, I really need to be taking more courses here?
I'll jump in with a quick answer there. When I was working at Memorial Church, I had the opportunity to preach, and I realized I really like preaching. So I'm going to be taking a preaching course in the spring, and that's something I never knew that I would have liked. So, and that's been because what happens in preaching is you really get a chance to really dive into the text and really interpret it from your own context. So I found that really, and I never would have known that had I not done the Memorial Church internship.
That's great.
Tien, how would you answer that?
So when I work with student at MIT, it's not like when I work with my congregation, because in my congregation I have like kind of authority. Whatever I teach, people don't really question that. But with students, they always like, why is that, and how can we understand this from a non-Buddhist point of view? So I took classes with Professor Charles Hallisey, and then the question, sometimes he said something that is very weird. I would ask, how come? And then his answer is always, why not? So that is kind of open my mind to accept what is not to ask how come, but reframe that question as why not. Yeah.
I think we're coming to the end of our time. Sarah, are there any closing remarks that you need? And we want to honor everyone's time. So.
No, I think we're all set. I just want to thank everyone so much for attending, and to all of our wonderful panelists. We will make this recording available and send it out to all of the registrants, as well as put it up on our website so folks will be able to access. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. A very special thank you to our students and to you, Sarah, for all the work you do in admissions. And thank you, Emily, as ever, my partner in ministry studies. It's a real joy. So thank you.
Well,
And thank you all for being with us.